Hi there, welcome to the Mirja Vahala Art Studio where inspiring minds meet. This is a painting that I created of a place called Idaho Peak in the West Kootenays. It's famous for its wildflowers. The scent is amazing, so I've named it Heaven Scent. It's 14 by 18 inches and it's an acrylic painting, and I've done it partly with a palette knife and partly with a brush. The palette knife's purpose is to create some texture in the painting as I'm going along. And then as I do layers, I like to take the brush to do glazes on top of those sections I've done with the palette knife. In terms of design, this piece again is one of the types that's got a diagonal running through it like this. There's also a bit of perspective created by this hiking trail that's going into here. And this is called a tunnel, where you look through and see something through an enclosed area like this. I really enjoyed the juxtaposition of warm and cool colors while I was painting on this, and as you look at the time-lapse video, you'll see how I did that. I didn't videotape it, but at the end of the piece, after I looked at this for a while, I realized that there was a few things missing, and this is called a counterforce. I added this little bit of a dead tree here, curving in this way. And what it does is a bit of a counterforce to this strong line that's coming this way. So it's a little bit of a nice weight, this small thing against this big sweeping line. Anyways, I hope you enjoy this video, and if you want, you can subscribe and like this as well. Thanks so much. We'll see you again soon. Here we go. This started on a base of pyrrole orange, and I drew on with a white chalk. Now I'm adding dioxazine violet with lots of medium, using that palette knife, letting my wrist roll around in all sorts of directions to keep the brush marks interesting. I load the side of the palette knife with a swoop when I want to do those vertical marks, and use the very tip of it more carefully when I go to the narrower kind of edges that I have at the top of the trees. I've added a little bit of phthalo green into that violet as well as I'm going down, which makes the paint go a little bit darker. Continuing to look for those dark areas. Notice how dull that dioxazine violet looks when it's glazed over top of the orange. Here, after that was dried, I took phthalo green and I glazed it over top of those violet areas to dull the violet back and also to create more of a green tinge. That phthalo green is making that orange color look like a nice natural green. Here I've tinted dioxazine violet and placed it in varying shades that will represent the grass later on and the lighter edges of the trees. Notice the scratch marks that I placed inside of the grassy areas just to create some more texture. This type of painting is always an exploration of color. I see now that as I've added the tinted and darker shades of dioxazine violet, the underneath color of green is basically getting covered up, and that's okay. Sometimes I find that some of the color will show through and some of it doesn't, but the goal is to get lots of varied color. Here I'm adding a glaze of phthalo blue over top of the tints of dioxazine violet, creating a nice blue-violet color. Once that was dry, nickel azle yellow is being glazed over top of the foreground grasses and phthalo green in the background areas of the trees. Okay, so it got a little bit too dark in the shadow area, so these are tints of dioxazine violet near the lighter edges of the trees. And then I took chromium green oxide and tinted it and added those marks into the foreground and into the grass areas where the light would hit, just to create some more tonal value areas. Okay, a little bit more phthalo green glazed over top of the violets. And back to the nickel azle yellow over top of those tints of chromium green oxide. Here I'm drawing in where I want to show the magenta colored flowers, and defining the path a little bit more and how I want the edge of the trees to look in the background, plus a little bit of the tunnel. Okay, so these are tints of anthraquinone blue, and this is tints of quinacridone magenta for the flowers. Magenta's been glazed over those tints of magentas on the flowers, and a little bit more yellow's been added up into the top of the trees. Here we have that anthraquinone blue tinted and adding some more yellow on top of that. The path is created with transparent red oxide and white, and the background trees are made with chromium green oxide and white. And the sky is also chromium oxide green plus a lot of white. And I'm working into the negative space areas around the trees and creating some light holes as well. At this stage, I'm continuing to do small adjustments of tonal values, lightening and darkening, and also brightening up various areas like that little distant field that you see with a little bright yellow. Here I'm continuing to define the path area, adding tints and glazes and shades, and creating that textured look that a path would have in the forest. Here I took chromium oxide green and magenta and added white, and a little bit more magenta than the green to create a dull pinky color to go into the sky in the background. The day was quite smoky, so there's a little bit of that smoke haze in the background that I want to portray. Here I continue to do the push-pull of lightening and darkening, defining the edges of trees. Those background trees needed to look further back because the smoke was coming closer, and so pushing that back, creating some more light holes between the trees, and building up that little tiny tunnel in the distance, adding more flowers with the magenta and tints and more of the light green areas as well. Here I want to lighten the right-hand edge of those trees, so I'm adding a lighter tint of dioxazine violet. And phthalo green has been glazed over that dioxazine violet as I did in the other trees. And moving around, adding some more light greens for the grass areas, lightening, darkening. There's a lot of back and forth at this point in the painting. I also took cadmium orange and put little marks next to the magenta areas in the flowers, and that really made them pop a little more. Again, I want to relighten again those trees on the left, making the darks look a lot more interesting. Back to the flowers, back and forth, back and forth. At the end of the painting, when I thought I was done, this is the stage I thought I hadn't videotaped, but I did. I thought it was finished, but it still didn't feel like it was quite there. So by adding these marks of ultramarine blue plus white, these little hints of blue flowers between all the magentas and the greens, it really added a lot more interest to the painting. And also the foreground trees felt too cool compared to the background trees, so I'd taken yellow ochre, or actually yellow oxide, and tinted did scrubby marks on the edges of those trees on the top left. And then here's the little, also you saw me working on that little dead tree on the right hand side that curves up and into that diagonal line that we talked about earlier. Okay, I think the painting is done. I'm happy with how the foreground comes forward with the pink, orange, and yellow greens, and how the colors recede into the distance with the more blue-green types of color. So here's the photo stages of the paintings. The first step is, the orange color that I put onto the canvas with the drawing, then adding the glazes of dioxazine violet with phthalo green. This is tinted dioxazine violet. The violet areas have been glazed with phthalo blue, and then the next stage is adding a layer of nickel azo yellow on the brighter parts of green. I've added dioxazine violet and tints of the chromium green oxide. So now those areas have been glazed with a nickel azo yellow. Here's a little chalk drawing showing me where I want to go next and where to put those pink flowers. And this is the tint of magenta and a tint of chromium oxide green. The pink areas were glazed with magenta and the chromium oxide green with nickel azo yellow. At this stage I continue to add tints of different colors and continuing to lighten the darks with some dioxazine violet and phthalo greens, adding some of those cadmium orange bits to the pinks of the flowers, joining up some of those masses of the pink flowers, and again re-lightening the dark areas of trees on the left and making more blue-green colors of the trees going into the distance. To balance out the blue-green colors in the background, I decided to add some blue into the foreground. So with ultramarine blue and titanium white, I created various shades of that blue color between the pinks, yellows, and oranges, which helped to tie the painting together. Anyway, it's done. Here's a supply list, and hope you enjoyed this. Please subscribe if you want to see more videos, and thanks so much for watching. Take care.